thing right now that we're seeing across the country. I don't condone some of the behavior, certainly don't condone some of the incendiary language that's being used on both sides of the issue, both by some folks in my party as well as folks like the Speaker and the President. As a member of Congress, I will tell you, people are excited. They're anxious, they're concerned, but rightfully so. Healthcare is a very personal issue. And we as Americans living in the greatest country on earth enjoy some of the greatest products, some of the greatest services, some of the greatest physicians in the world, and they want to make sure, rightfully so, that those aren't taken away or hindered by this reform package. I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the committees that I work on. Many of you know that Ray was on the Appropriations Committee. I could not get on the Appropriations Committee in my first term. That's usually for the senior members of Congress. And so I tried to look for ways that I could get on a committee as a freshman that would do the most good for my district. And one of the things that I heard throughout the district as I traveled as a candidate was economic development. Didn't matter whether I was in a town like Peoria or Morton or Washington or Pekin, or I was down in Beardstown or Quincy. If people can't get in and out of our communities, if we don't have adequate water, if we don't have rails or highways, our local communities shrivel up and die. And so we need economic development, we need access, we need infrastructure. And so I fought to get on the Transportation Infrastructure Committee. Many of you know that this is the year for the highway reauthorization. If you've been following that issue, you'll know that the President has gotten into a bit of a tussle with the Congress over whether or not we should pass a highway bill. I, for one, believe we need a highway bill. There's nothing more expensive than deferred maintenance in our country. You don't need to see a bridge collapse to understand that, or living in the state of Illinois for as many years as we've gone without a capital bill to know that we need an infrastructure investment here in our country. I find it, as a side note, a bit interesting that the President does not want to spend the time or the money on infrastructure, on a transportation bill, which is actually something that most Americans, Republicans and Democrats, support their tax dollars going towards, as opposed to all of these omnibus, the stimulus, the bailouts that have been passing, these huge spending bills, which have been, by and large, voted on a partisan basis and are highly controversial when you go back home. And this is actually a bill that you can get Republicans and Democrats to vote for, and at this point, he's having Speaker Pelosi put the brakes on the transportation bill. We will pass one eventually. It's likely not to happen this year now. And so, talking to Chairman Overstar, who's the chairman of the committee, a Democrat from Minnesota, he believes that we will pass it next year. But know that being on that committee, I also got on the Highway Subcommittee, which is the subcommittee where the bill starts. I'm in a good position to make sure we get our fair share of resources on some of the important highway projects here in our area, as well as rail and also water, which for those following the lock and dam issue is extremely important also for jobs as well as for agriculture. The second committee I'm on is the Small Business Committee. As I mentioned, as a small business person, as someone who believes that they're the heartbeat of America, it's how most people get their jobs. We need to be focused on how we can help small businesses, and been working with the Democratic chairman there on some research and development tax credits and research and development tax incentives, as well as accelerated depreciation for small businesses to help them incentivize making capital investments that will ultimately lead to more jobs to be created. Those bills are moving through the Congress. We did pass, I was able to pass a bill on research and development tax dollars. So assuming that it passes the Senate, it passed a couple weeks ago out of the House, they will be increasing the amount of basically incentives for research and development for small businesses. The third committee that I'm on is government oversight reform. Now, many of you probably don't know what government oversight reform does, but the simplest way for me to tell you about this committee is that anytime you see Congress investigating something, that's the Government Oversight Reform Committee. So they are the investigatory arm of Congress. It's probably the most exciting committee that I sit on because we're always investigating something. And with the Democrats controlling the Congress right now, we're not investigating the White House, which is usually the case when it's a Republican Congress and Congress and a Republican White House, they like to investigate each other. That's how the Monica Lewinsky scandal broke, was in the Government Oversight and Reform Committee. That's how the investigations into Scooter Libby with Vice President Dick Cheney in the last years was in the Government Oversight Committee. When you saw baseball players getting drug in for steroid use, that was in the Government Oversight Committee. So what we've been spending this year on is really on investigating all of what's happened in Wall Street. And so the last 2 weeks were spent with the Merrill Lynch and Bank of America merger. And we heard from Chairman Ken Lewis, Chairman of Bank of America, Hank Paulson, who is the Treasury Secretary, as well as Ben Bernanke, who's our current chair of the Fed. And each of them gave a varying account of what happened in these discussions at the end of this year and the beginning of this year, end of last year and the beginning of this year. And so don't be surprised if you don't see some legal action coming out of that Bank of America Merrill Lynch deal. The synopsis of what happened was basically Ben Bernanke, the current Fed chair, as well as Hank Paulson, the last Treasury Secretary, basically told Ken Lewis, the chairman of Bank of America, that if he didn't consummate the deal and go forward with the merger with Merrill Lynch, that they would seek to have him removed as the chairman of Bank of America. Now, many of you understand the intricacies of this, know that the federal government should not be removing the CEO of a privately held company, but there are also different things that they have at their disposal. And Ben Bernanke, of course, said he would never have been a party of such discussions. And Hank Paulson said, of course he told him that, because that would have been dilatory, and they have the right to remove anyone who's dilatory as a CEO of a publicly traded company. And we've subsequently gotten emails now that from the vice chairman of the Fed to Chairman Bernanke saying, I'm very concerned about the pressure you're putting on these people, and so on. So we see this pattern of the government getting involved in the private industry starting under the last administration and really kind of supercharged, if you will, under the current administration. And that concerns a lot of us in Congress because we don't believe that's an appropriate role for any government, let alone the federal government, to be doing. So with that, I want to open it up to questions that you have about any of the committee or legislative work or any of the specific bills that I mentioned.
So how soon do you see a health care bill coming out of Congress, or do you?
He asked, Mr. Zimmerman asked whether or not, or how soon I see a health care bill coming out of Congress. I don't have a crystal ball. I will tell you that what I believe will happen is you will see the 200 plus members, the Democratic members, come back from their break. And they will be less supportive, those who were supportive, of the health care bill as it stands now. Let me start by saying, because this is kind of the issue of the day on health care, I think we need health care reform. With health insurance premiums increasing at twice the rate of inflation, we need to do something. Okay, the reality is there's inefficiencies within the system. There's defensive medicine. There's a lot of things that are happening. The government has a role to play in trying to help fix it. However, that's a far cry from the federal government becoming the insurer for every American citizen, which is fundamentally what this bill does. If you understand the text of the 1,100-page document, in very short order, they put a time clock on new issue for new health plans. So basically, within a short order, within a couple of years, you will no longer be able to buy. Private health insurance companies will not be able to issue new health insurance plans. You will basically incentivize businesses who provide an employer-based coverage to drop it because they'll be paying the tax like everyone else. And then third, people will then result in going into the public option, which will be there.